Identity management webinar. With me here is Keiko Takahashi.
Hello, everyone.
Couple things, just so you know, like you heard, you guys all are muted right now. If you have any questions, you should be able to enter a question through text through the interface, and we'll try to get to those. We may wait till the end. We hope to have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. And also just wanted to make sure everyone knew, because we saw that there was a pretty wide variety of attendees, that this will be mostly functional, especially going over some of the new work we've done with access security. There will be a little bit of technical information near the end. So if you're hoping to become a KIM developer after this, then this may not be for you. But welcome, and let's get started. Yeah, I guess you don't need to see too much about us. But if you do need to get a hold of us, feel free to send an email anytime. So we're going to walk through a few different parts of KIM. We'll quickly go through what KIM is at a high level. The people that are new to it can get an understanding. We're going to walk through some of integration of KFS in KIM. Then we're going to do a live demo of the access security module that we've created. And we'll talk about some of the implementation issues and what we've learned going through some production implementations. And finally, I'll follow up with some of the technical issues that you might find interesting. So from a high level, KIM is a new module. It was just recently added to RICE. It was one of the last ones to be created before the RICE 1.0 was released. RICE 1.0 is what is a part of KFS 3.0, just so everyone knows. At a basic level, it is a centralized API and middleware for person, role, and group type information. It provides kind of a consistent authorization, and I'll get into some of the more technical parts of that later, but it can be a centralized identity management solution for your entire campus, not just for systems like other Kuali applications to use, but it can easily be accessed through various APIs, whether it's Java or HTML, for any application that you might have. And it also has a nice user interface for managing some of that complicated data. Once we get in the demo, you'll definitely see how much that helps to have a nice interface for that. So some of the terms that you'll hear when using KIM, we want to go through a few of those. At a high level, there's something called a namespace. And namespace is really a way to segregate the information in KIM related to different applications or different pieces of middleware. If you looked in kind of the standard KIM data set now, you'd see some of the examples you see on the right, where KNS, which is nervous system, or workflow, or system. That's a way so that you can segregate both users and permissions and roles. So you can kind of you can control that for different applications, or you can set it at a higher level so that some of that information goes across applications.
And later on, I'll show you how that can be used in my examples.
Entity and person can, for someone new to KIM, can be a little confusing in that they kind of sound the same, but they are definitely different, and it's important to understand the difference. A person, I think, just represents an individual in the system. An entity can be a person or every person has an entity record, but not every entity record has a person. So an entity can also be something like an external system. Or, there's an entity, for example, in the system that represents Kuali RICE. There's another entity that represents KFS. So when batch processes and other things are happening behind the scenes where those also have to have security applied to them, that's what those users are for. And we'll get into more detail about how those are managed a little later on.
And for those who do not understand anything that Tony just said, important thing to remember is that principal name is your user logon.
And someone did ask if this will be recorded, and yes, it will, and it will be available afterwards if you want to share it. Groups, I think, are fairly self-explanatory of associating multiple people and multiple entities with together, so that, and then they can also be assigned to roles, or groups can be nested, so you can have groups that have groups as part of them. When you actually get into implementation, you'll find that groups are used quite heavily. They don't have to be. I mean, this is really something, and we'll get into this when we talk about implementation, but groups are a very flexible way of managing people. You could also assign people directly to roles, but it's actually more efficient to assign them to groups and then assign groups to roles. And again, we'll get into that a little later. Out of the box, KFS as well as RICE do not include any groups. It's all done through roles. So that's definitely an important part of the implementation process. Permissions are associated with the role. Nothing is directly associated with any user. Of course, you could have a single user assigned to a role if you wanted something that specific. Permissions are really designed to control what a user is allowed to do. So a permission would be used, for example, to say this user is allowed to create a specific type of document. So if you want to limit who's allowed to do a requisition, set that up as a permission.
A good example might be, let's say you want somebody to modify a entity record in person document, then you have to make sure that you have a permission to modify entity. So when in doubt, try to look at the permissions and make sure that you have a privilege to do so under your role.
Right, and then permissions also take advantage of templates, which can be reused across different permissions. It starts to get a little complicated when you really dig into it. There's several different types of data that go into setting up a permission. That includes the type and the details as well as the template. And template will have various qualifiers assigned to it, for example. The slides will also be available, yes. I don't know if everyone can see the questions we're being asked, but I'm trying to answer them as we go, if it makes sense. And as you probably already figured out, we kind of mentioned roles. But roles are where permissions and responsibilities are aggregated. And roles also have qualifiers. With a qualifier is something, for example, like the chart of account or the object code, or various details that associate. So, for example, if a particular user is only allowed into certain charts, then those qualifiers are what's used to associate the chart that the user is assigned to with the specific role, and therefore what permissions they have. There's different types of roles. When you start using the system, you can have nested roles, as I talked about, where you can have roles within roles within roles, and that can go as deep as you want. And derived roles is another important topic and something to understand, because a derived role, for example, is a role that isn't specifically assigned. So if you went into the system and looked at a derived role in the data, you wouldn't see any users specifically assigned to that role. They get assigned because of how they're related through other data. You have a good example of that, Keiko?
The derived role, yeah, I'm going to have a slide that explains that. But for instance, the fiscal officer, that would be based upon the attribute of an account. So if you are a fiscal officer of an account, anything that relates to the approval of fiscal officer, you have a responsibility to approve or disapprove the document.
Great.
And a good example for nested roles might be, for instance, you might be a camp manager specific to a campus to maintain the assets of the particular campus. But then asset manager can be a member of that camp manager. So asset manager can handle all the assets across the board. So that would be a good example of the nested roles. So you have to be careful about who you are giving what role during your implementation.
So responsibility is kind of the other important part of a role. There's permissions and then there's responsibilities. Responsibilities are very specific to workflow. So a responsibility means for this particular role, who is responsible for responding in workflow. So if you've got a workflow where requisition has been